like to extend a warm Governor State University welcome to our next presenter this evening at Public Scholarship in the Humanities, Jim Coccola, one of the contributors to the collection co-edited by Rosemary. Dr. Coccola is Associate Professor in the Department of Humanities and Arts at Worcester Polytechnic Institute in Worcester, Massachusetts, where he also serves as Academic Director and Poetry Instructor in the local division of the Clemente Course in the Humanities, a program recognized internationally for bringing college-level humanities courses to people living in economic distress. At WPI, Coccola was recognized in 2015 with the Romeo L. Maruzzi Young Faculty Award for Innovation in Undergraduate Education. His first book, Places in the Making, A Cultural Geography of American Poetry, University of Iowa Press, 2016, won a Helen Tarter First Book Subvention Award from the American Comparative Literature Association. Dr. Coccola's chapter in Public Scholarship and Literary Studies is entitled Lifting the Color Curtain with the Clemente Course in the Humanities. And his presentation this evening will share with us how, with the sponsorship of the Massachusetts Foundation for the Humanities, the program transforms literary criticism into public scholarship, bringing faculty expertise in literature into conversation with the life experiences of students. Jim, welcome.
Thanks, Dean Merrick, for that introduction, and thanks to everyone at Governor State University for organizing tonight's event. In my allotted time, I want to offer some brief reflections on my 7 years as Academic Director of the Worcester branch of the Clemente Course in the Humanities, before opening up to some broader reflections on the shifting stakes of public scholarship and the key of humanistic inquiry. To begin, I want to point to a pair of insistent titular questions posed by Matthew Wickman, founding director of the BYU Humanities Center, in his 2016 essay for the University of Toronto Quarterly, which asks, what are the public humanities? No, really, what are they? Acknowledging the public humanities as a conflicted, if not an impossible ideal, Wickman draws on returns from a survey instrument, calling attention to a distinction drawn by many between the public humanities and publicly engaged scholarship and teaching. It seems to me that the public humanities take particularly concentrated form in acts of publicly engaged scholarship and teaching. And so I will focus my remarks on my work with the Clemente Course as a site where my own scholarship and teaching have emerged together in public. The Clemente Course in the Humanities, honored with a National Humanities Medal in 2014, provides low-income adults with a multidisciplinary course of study in the liberal arts. Over 8 months and 110 contact hours, students complete coursework in American history, art history, critical thinking and writing, literature, and philosophy. Books, childcare, tuition, and transportation are provided free of charge, and students are eligible to earn up to 6 college credits. Nationwide, there are dozens of Clemente branches, including 3 sites in the Chicago area operating under the aegis of the Odyssey Project, in partnership with Illinois Humanities and the University of Illinois, Chicago. At most sites, Clemente is designed around the so-called Western canon as a point of departure toward engaged citizenship. As Academic Director and Poetry Instructor in the Worcester branch of the Bard College Clemente Course in the Humanities, I ensure that we also connect to works reflecting our particularly diverse cohorts. Worcester has long been a city of immigrants and their children, and we see that clearly in the constitution of our own Clemente students. Here I am in 2016, pictured among a typical cross-section of students, in this case, moving clockwise from top left, addressing those with origins in Liberia, Kenya, Paraguay, and Jamaica. On this evening, we were reading the Epic of Gilgamesh, a foundational text from Mesopotamia, seeming periphery that is in fact a center. This work, rediscovered in the late 19th century after 2 millennia of obscurity, has only recently been anthologized in earnest. Here's a trio of students with origins in Algeria, Trinidad and Tobago, and Jamaica, who paid close attention to a range of characters in the epic, relating not only to Gilgamesh, the ostensible hero, but perhaps even more decisively to less respected counterparts like Enkidu and Ishtar, coming from class, gendered, and racialized positions more identifiable with their own. Clemente students in Worcester get heavy doses of the canonical, but they're also aware of materials extending beyond that tradition. As Vicky Mireles, a 2015 graduate, pictured here at the Concord Museum during the Thoreau Bicentennial, has argued, we have to write our own stories and our own histories. No one is going to write them for us. You're never going to find these things in the books. That doesn't stop us from looking in books, but we don't stop with books either. Here, Mireles looks on to some fellow Clemente students at the American Antiquarian Society, an archive of early American print culture whose broadsides, manuscripts, newspapers, and other print materials read quite differently among this cohort than among the general run of American Antiquarian Society fellows, members, and patrons. If one understanding of public scholarship frames such work as scholarship brought to the public, here is a corresponding model. The public brought to scholarship, not just as a passive audience, but as here, in acts of their own interpretation and making. Here I want to make a brief plug for our forthcoming volume, Public Scholarship and Literary Studies. In this collection, you can find my essay, Raising the Color Curtain, the Clemente Course in the Humanities. In this chapter, I build to a reading of Richard Wright's late career, where his report on the Bandung Conference in The Color Curtain of 1955 led to a further reorientation away from Europe toward Asia, resulting in a flurry of thousands of haiku written over the last 18 months of his life. I developed this reading of Wright's life and work over years of engagement with several Clemente cohorts, a case where publicly engaged teaching led to publicly engaged scholarship. There's more where this came from. By considering a range of poets among Clemente's students, from Sappho and Pindar through William Shakespeare and William Blake to Marilyn Chin and Claudia Rankine, I have become a more perceptive and responsive reader and scholar. Reading such poets in public, with a public, I have become a public scholar of a particular kind. In a similar effort, multimodal encounter, 2 case studies in the recovery of the Black signifier, published in Poetry and Pedagogy Across the Lifespan, Disciplines, Classrooms, and Contexts, I discuss my experience of teaching, interpreting, and understanding poems by Langston Hughes and Maya Angelou as an instructor alongside several cohorts of Clemente students. As academic director, I have also been fortunate to observe the teaching and learning that occurs in the other 4 strands of the Clemente course. And so I have gained a sense of the relationships between public scholarship and teaching, not only in literary studies, but across the humanities. Thanks to our partnership with the Worcester Art Museum, we have been able to conduct regular gallery tours across the academic year, often connected to special exhibitions, as per this portrait of student Jorelis Castillo during our visit to the Samurai exhibition of 2015, which featured in a corresponding front page story in the Worcester Telegram and Gazette. How do we get from public teaching to public scholarship? The path I want to speak about tonight leads from poetry through art history and American history back to poetry again. One of Wright's most significant haiku is the first one that appears in his posthumously published volume, Haiku, This Other World. It reads as follows. I am nobody. A red, sinking autumn sun took my name away. Worcester Clemente students tend to read this poem as a comment on the traumatic legacies of enslavement, placing adjectives like red, sinking, and autumn within the space of the middle passage. Thinking in their company, not only in terms of poetry, but also in terms of art history and American history, I began to connect this poem both to Wright's own transatlantic histories and to the transatlantic histories of a related painting, J.M.W. Turner's Slave Ship, Slavers Throwing Overboard the Dead and Dying, Typhoon Coming On, from 1840. Turner's painting points in turn to the Zong Massacre of November 1781, when, en route from Liverpool to the Caribbean, running low on provisions, British enslavers threw 133 enslaved people overboard, subsequently collecting insurance claims upon arrival in Jamaica. These histories in turn point back toward poetry, where a sustained treatment of this event emerged in Tobagonian Canadian poet M. Norvis Phillips' fragmentary book-length work Zong of 2011. Phillips' Zong links more clearly to Wright's haiku when routed through Turner's painting and through the discourse between abolitionists Bellotta Equiano and Granville Sharp that undergird the painting itself. Though I had seen Turner's painting as an undergraduate, and though I had read Equiano and Philip as a graduate student, I'm not sure I would have linked all of these intertexts through Wright's haiku had I not been discussing history, reading poetry, and regarding paintings in the company of Clemente students from Ghana, Liberia, Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, and the United States. Such classroom and gallery work extended through the early months of 2020. Here's one of the last photographs of our work together, taken after an art history session in late January. And then the shutdowns began. What have public scholarship and public teaching looked like since then? To what extent has the public in public scholarship been reconstituted over the last 12 months? After pausing for the spring semester, we concluded our work with our 2020 cohort in the fall, but due to local restrictions, we're unable to hold an in-person graduation ceremony per our usual practice. Rather than holding a remote ceremony, we opted to hand-deliver diplomas, gift books, and printed copies of remarks to each student's residence, where they celebrated separately in hopes of convening as a larger group at some later date. This spring, we are holding a remote bridge course designed for alumni and newly admitted students to the 2022 cohort, titled U.S. Citizenship and Its Intersections. Co-taught by yours truly and by Amy Richter, Chair of History at Clark University, this class examines questions of citizenship across a range of materials, from the U.S. Constitution and various primary source documents connected to the struggle for women's suffrage, to Mine Okubo's Citizen 13660, a graphic narrative and memoir of Japanese American internment, as well as James Rutenbeck's documentary film, A Reckoning in Boston, which features a number of students from the Dorchester Clemente Course, including Carl Chandler, pictured here. Returning to Matthew Whitman, founding director of the BYU Humanities Center, and his titular questions, what are the public humanities? No, really, what are they? I want to underscore a shift in his thinking that came toward the end of his survey efforts. Rather, Whitman concluded, than the question that initially incited this survey, what are the public humanities? We might pose a rather different one. Where are they? In 2016, Whitman wondered whether the public humanities were better located in old-fashioned outreach or in newer models of engagement, whether in research or teaching, and whether within universities or alongside them. In the Worcester branch of the Clemente Course, we have attempted to thread all of these alternatives together, collaborating not merely with a single arts and culture institution, social services organization, or university, but several of each, standing as a pivot that might connect our partners to one another. In the 2020s, Whitman's questions about the dimensions and locations of the public humanities have assumed a new urgency in the midst of pandemic-related adjustments. Seen through a digital lens, the public humanities might seem to be everywhere now, but there's also a sense in which such events, our own not accepted, can fall into a utopianism that takes us back to the etymological roots of that word, utopia, namely, no place. Though public in a certain sense, and more expansive in terms of national and global reach, digital initiatives run the risk of proving less grounded in their efforts at community building, and in any event, they're the cost of being less animated by those encounters that emerge when public engagement occurs in person. If the answer to where are the public humanities is primarily online, then we're more likely to lose our geographical and social coordinates as a public, losing our bearings in the process. Consider the Oxford English Dictionary's definition of public, which is prefaced in adjectival form by an unusual acknowledgement that public can be understood as, in general, and in most of the senses, the opposite of private. Thus, in the authoritative record of the English language, public is framed negatively, not with reference to what it is, but rather with reference to what it is not. Perhaps even more extraordinarily, this acknowledgement is followed by a striking disclaimer, so that among the several forms of public as an adjective, the various senses pass into each other by many intermediate shades of meaning. The exact meaning often depends upon the noun qualified. In some expressions, the precise sense is unambiguous, but in others, more than one sense is vaguely present, and it is difficult to determine in what sense precisely the thing in question was originally called public. Tonight, in this panel, we're concerned to qualify nouns like scholarship and humanities with that adjective, public. From my standpoint, in my home office in Holden, Massachusetts, public scholarship and the public humanities thrive best when scholars stand forth as humans present to one another in public, regardless of formal training or level of expertise. These days, when we remain only vaguely present to one another, as the public and private domains continue to blur in many contexts, and as some aim to decouple the public sphere from public space, we would do well to insist that public scholarship and the public humanities need a public it can join in facing itself and its work, not screen to screen, but looking to a time when the mask can finally begin to come down face to face. Thank you.